We'll make a start. Thank you all for coming. It's a great pleasure to have a good audience here, and enormous pleasure for me to welcome back to Hatfield Jenny Henman, who was a Hatfield geographer in, I think, 98 to 2001. She even did my hydrology module, she reminded me, and so that's a bit of history. So did Tara, as a university sustainability manager, so it's a small world. Anyway, thank you for coming. At the end of the evening, the guys who are organising this ask you to fill in a short questionnaire, so we'll give that out before you're allowed to escape. Jenny's going to talk about your future, which is a project she's centrally involved with in Peru. I'll leave her to explain all about it. I know she's going to start with a video, so I'm going to put the lights out. Whether that messes up the video recording, I don't know, but we shall see, and then we'll just go from there. Anyway, okay, Jenny Henman.
Great, thank you very much, Tim. It's really great and exciting to be back here in Hatfield. So we'll just start with a video which only lasts about 3 minutes to transport us to the Peruvian Amazon, and then I'll talk a bit more about our work.
Hola amigos, bienvenidos al Perú. En este momento nos encontramos a orillas de nuestro río Amazonas, el más caudaloso del mundo. Nosotros estamos empeñados en recuperar esta deforestación que ha sufrido la vasta región amazónica.
The main problem we have here in the Amazon is deforestation. But at the same time, we have to know exactly what are the drivers of deforestation. In that regard, we have to work locally. And of course, the main problem is food production. Also, the local people, of course, they cut the forest. They rely on farm in order to have some food. But when that problem starts being spread and many people start doing that, that's the main problem. So in that regard, we have to look for alternatives.
De árboles, tanto frutales y maderables, para conservar el medio ambiente.
El marupá y el añalí son plantados, una vez plantados después tienes que esperar a 25 a 30 años. 25 a 30 años. Frutales, que es añalí, ya pues a los 5 años ya
porque en realidad se está viendo plantas de futuro, nos está dando un gran apoyo para ver nuestra reforestación bien hecha y bien manejada por técnicos especialistas que manejan este proyecto.
Partiendo por el principio de que solo no somos nada, solo somos como una gota ya en el océano, siempre asociados, trabajando de forma asociada, estamos más unidos y somos más fuertes, los pequeños agricultores como nosotros debemos trabajar así por nuestro sentido.
La Amazonía peruana está pasando por un momento crítico. La reforestación permitiría que las propias comunidades tengan la posibilidad de insertarse en un mercado local, nacional o internacional con beneficios propios para ellos y con un manejo sostenible.
As I said, I'm absolutely delighted to be back here tonight in Hatfield. I left 13 years ago, so it's quite strange to be back, and I'd forgotten how beautiful Durham is, but it's been nice to walk around today and see it again. I'm just quite interested in about who's in the room. So if you just put your hand up if you're undergraduate. And keep it up if you're Hatfield undergraduate. And the rest of you are mainly postgrads? Okay, great. So as Professor Burke said, I'm the founder and also the chairman of Plant Your Future, which is a charity working in the Peruvian Amazon. I thought it might be interesting just to start a little bit on my story about how I got into this, and also that gives us a bit more background on what we're doing. I did geography here, and I did a master's in environmental studies at Brown University in the States. And I'd learned quite a lot about, slash and burn agriculture in school, and then again in my studies here at Brown. But it wasn't until I went to do my master's thesis work in Peru that I really came to understand the reality of it. Because when I was at school, I always was thinking, why is no one found a solution to this? Why do they keep doing it? It sounds like it's very counterproductive. But the reality of it is it's so much more complex. And so when I was in Peru, I sort of lived with these communities in the Amazon on a day-to-day basis and saw that they are deforesting the forest because they have absolutely no alternative. So they're clearing the forest to sow crops, to feed their family, and with the surplus income from that, buy the other bare necessities of life. And it's very much a sort of break-even subsistence existence. And it's really, really hard work. It's backbreaking. People are working mainly with machetes or hand-powered saws to clear the forest to plant these crops. It's incredibly hot, it's buggy, and then they get this really minimal return for it. And most of them have their small land holdings, which they're basically clearing, and they've now degraded. And they're from the area. They love the Amazon. They love the wildlife there as well, but they're having to clear it to subsist. So I think I was really struck when I was there by the kind of tragedy of the situation, that we've got this amazing area of biodiversity, people are living off it to subsist, but they continue in poverty, and at the same time, we're losing this biodiversity and we're contributing to climate change. So after doing my master's research there, I felt quite compelled to carry on with this work. And when I left, the farmers said to me, who I'd got to know quite well, oh right, well now you know how much we need help and understand these barriers that stop us changing. Maybe you could come back and help us. And I was 22, and was no, I was just doing research. Don't feel ready to do that yet. But then with time, I continued to get experience in the sector, and 4 years ago, set up Plant Your Future. So before we go on, I just wanted to say a few more things about the area and why it's worth protecting. So we're working in the northeast Peruvian Amazon, in the western part of the Amazon arc, and we're in the Napo forests. The biodiversity where we're working is really high. So there's this quite rare white sand forest, it's a particular type of rainforest called Varujal. And you get over 300 in some locations, over 300 species of trees have been recorded in 1 hectare, which is incredibly high. Just to put that in context, in the UK, there's 33 native tree species in the whole country. So this is quite staggering. They have over 300 in 1 hectare in this type of forest. So it's really worth protecting. Apart from the trees, there's also very interesting bird and animal life. There's pink dolphins and jaguar, and these amazing rare birds, like the gnatcatcher. There's only 12 pairs left in the world. And there's also the opportunity for lots of medicinal cures from the forest. This area, the Amazon itself is obviously home to thousands of people, not only in cities, but also in rural communities, who really depend on the ecosystem. So it seems like the Amazon is really well worth preserving, but this issue of subsistence farming is a major driver of deforestation there. It's the main driver in Peru. So I think it's something that's worth thinking about and looking at. So that's why Plant Your Future is working on it, essentially. So to sort of introduce you to the topic a bit more, and I thought it would be useful to talk about this through a couple of farmers that we're working with, and one family in particular. So this is Celso. He's been working with Plant Your Future for about 2.5 years now. He lives in one of the 4 villages that we're working in Loreto, in northeast Peru. He's lived in the village of Morillo for about 15 years. He has a mainly grown-up family who've migrated away to Lima in search of better opportunities. because I guess they didn't really see a future there. I think it's one of the children still living there. And yeah, him and his wife earn all their income from clearing the forest and growing the subsistence crops, and they essentially live in poverty. His wife, Dora, also works on the farm with him. She is responsible for taking the crops to the market, and it's kind of quite touch and go what they earn in the market. Sometimes it even costs more to transport the crops to the market than they'll earn, and they're in this position where they're the lowest negotiator in the market. She just takes the produce there, shows up at her stand once a week or twice a week if it's a time where they've got lots of produce, and just sells it to whoever she can at whatever price she can get. It's like not a very good negotiating position. They never sell by contract, and she's not declaring any income for tax. So they're just not really in a strong position to negotiate, not adding any value to their product, always selling it raw, needing to sell it quickly because it might go off otherwise. So yeah, they're caught in this vicious circle basically. They're not able to reforest and change their activities because they don't have enough money to buy saplings. They don't have technical knowledge to be reforesting on a large scale. Obviously they do have a lot of technical farming knowledge at some level, but more with these subsistence crops that they grow. But growing timber trees or fruit trees is quite out of their range without support, because it's very difficult for them to cultivate large numbers of those because of the resources needed to do that, and they don't really have enough knowledge on pest control and actually the money to then buy pest control measures and fertilisation that's needed to really successfully reforest. They can't really sell their produce through contracts because they don't have the business know-how to get registered, to have a tax code, to actually sell in that manner. Ideally, they would associate with others through, say, a trade association or cooperative. But again, you need business know-how to be able to do that. And you also need resources to actually set up like a trade association and get it registered with a tax code. And that is all quite complicated. They live in the village and that has to happen in the town. So there's quite a lot of barriers for them to be changing their situation, basically. So they just carry on with the slash and burn because that's what they do to feed themselves and have enough money to live. So now they have a brighter future because they're working with Plant Your Future. This is a picture of Celso with one of the trees he planted through the project about 2 years ago. They planted 1,000 trees on 1 hectare. Our model generally is to plant 1,000 trees per hectare, and that would be split between timber and fruit trees. So we'll talk a bit more about our model in a minute, but that's sort of a general introduction to the kind of people we're working with and the kind of situation they face. So the overarching objective of Plant Your Future is to create a model for sustainable agriculture with smallholder farmers. Maybe you were wondering how we define smallholder farmers. For us, we don't define it by the number of hectares that they have. We define it by them essentially relying on the land for their main income and mainly using family labour to farm. That's the way we define smallholder farmers here. So I think we had this stat show up in the video actually. From 2000 to 2010, 7.9 million hectares deforested in the Peruvian Amazon. That's an area the size of Scotland. And the main driver of that was subsistence agriculture. And that is thousands of subsistence agriculturalists work, individually deforesting at the frontier, basically. So, and it's so complicated to, it's just so complicated to sort it out because it's not the case of working with a few people, it's the need to work with thousands of people in a coordinated manner to essentially change the whole paradigm of how agriculture works. And as hopefully as you understand from my introduction, it's so worth doing because they are living in poverty, actually their poverty in many cases is becoming worse because of land degradation, and we're seeing this huge loss of biodiversity. So specific aims of our charity, Plant Your Future. We want to improve the livelihoods of smallholder farmers. We want to restore ecosystems through reforestation with native species. We only work with farmers on degraded land, so we actually have we're quite targeted in terms of the activities of our charity. we specifically work with smallholder farmers who own their land, and we only work with them on land that's deforested and has actually been deforested for at least 10 years. So there's no perverse incentive for them to quickly deforest and then join our scheme. We use satellite imagery to look at how long their area has been deforested. So we work with people who've basically had quite long-term degradation going on their properties. We're interested in reducing carbon emissions through increased carbon storage on the land through terrestrial carbon sinks, i.e. planting trees. And we're really interested to protect tropical rainforests by reducing the deforestation pressure. So although our model is all about reforesting degraded lands with smallholders, we're hoping that will also have the knock-on effect of farmers being able to now use their area of land that they've reforested with our programme for more sustainable long-term agriculture and not need to carry on this cycle of clearing more forest every 2 years after the soil becomes unable to support this type of arable agriculture that they've been practicing before, which isn't particularly suited or is not suited to the soils in this area. So we hope that will lead to overall decrease in deforestation rate. Okay, so this is our model in a nutshell. We're implementing agroforestry systems, which is combining agriculture with forestry. So we're planting crops. We're planting their normal crops in the first year, but also some more high-value crops, such as chili peppers and cocona, which is another shrub, and papaya. And then we're planting, as I said, about 500 native fruit trees, so orchard crops, and about 500 timber trees on a given hectare that we work on with a farmer. So from that, we're hoping to improve their revenues from selling the fruits and the crops, selling the timber in the medium to long term, and then this other element of selling carbon offsets, which I'm going to explain a bit more in a minute. We feel that from looking at how projects have worked in Peru, in this area, in the past, they've not succeeded in any long-term sense in implementing agroforestry. Agroforestry itself is not that new. People have been trying to do agroforestry for a long time. Lots of charities doing that, lots of government aid programs doing that. But what they often don't do is think long-term, and they don't really specifically gear the program to the livelihood needs of the farmer and look at the income streams that the farmer will get in the future. So we feel our program is different in that sense because we think much more in the long term. We don't just come in and help them plant some trees, give them some saplings, because we know that won't be successful. They need help to maintain them. In the first 3 years, lots of weeding is needed, and also pest control and fertilisation and pruning to make sure the tree grows nice and straight, for example, so that it actually has a good timber value. Similarly, we know that they need to have some early revenue stream from this project to keep them motivated, because they've worked really hard to plant 1,000 trees and maintain them, but they need to have some revenue coming in straight away. So that, for example, is why it's so important to have our chili pepper program, where within 4 months of planting the chili peppers, they'll be producing them, and hopefully in the future they can even be adding value to the chili peppers by processing them and then selling them in shops locally, and hopefully even beyond to Lima, potentially internationally. Okay, so that's a picture of standing forests. So the standing forest, as I'm sure you know, stores a lot of carbon in the biomass. But when it's burnt, about 2/3 of that is released into the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide. And then that's a picture of an area that would have been quite like the first picture, but now has been totally deforested and is similar to some of the areas that we're reforesting. So it's that's a degraded pasture in the Amazon. So hopefully that's demonstrated that with deforestation you obviously get a lot of carbon emissions, but it means also there's the opportunity when you reforest to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and store it in tree biomass. So this is this other element of our carbon model that we are quantifying the carbon emission reductions as the trees are planted and converting that into a monetary value by selling carbon offsets into the voluntary market. So this was just a step back from this. Obviously, there's many ways we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions through cleaner energy programs and so on. But an interesting one is through tree planting schemes and through forest protection schemes. According to the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, about 20% of annual greenhouse gas emissions is from deforestation. So it's a major part of climate change, and it can also potentially be a major part of the solution. As you've seen, there's large areas of Peru and actually elsewhere in the world which are already deforested. So if we can reforest, then that's an interesting part of the strategy to mitigate climate change. To put that in context, actually, air travel contributes about 3% of annual global greenhouse gas emissions. So forestry actually is much more significant, and so is very important in this debate on climate change. Okay, so how is Plant Your Future working to address some of these problems that I've discussed this evening? So we're working up in Iquitos mainly. That's where we started. I don't know if anyone's been to Iquitos or heard of it. Iquitos is a pretty crazy town. It's the biggest city in the world that's inaccessible by road. It's 500,000 people in this jungle town. Grew up originally around the rubber industry. So it's quite a fascinating location. It's right on the Amazon River itself, so that's its main sort of transportation means, given it's not connected to the road network. And we're just starting a new pilot in Pucallpa, which is a more central Amazonian city in Peru. It's slightly drier because it's further south, but very similar problems with smallholder agriculture. It is on the road network, so there's actually been much more deforestation around there, which is partly why we're so interested to expand our activities there. So yeah, we're in a very basic terms, we're planting trees to provide a more sustainable alternative to slash and burn agriculture and ranching. And although our model is quite similar to what other people have done, because lots of people have done agroforestry, we believe our model is much more market orientated with this diversification of revenue streams, including considering when the different revenue streams will come in for the farmers. So just a few pictures to look at what we're doing. This is the baseline scenario. So this is the sort of business as usual scenario of what will be going on where we're working. You've got these degraded pastures on the left, or you've got slash and burn, where they'll be planting bananas or maize or rice shortly. They just cleared the forest. But we're installing agroforestry systems, at the same time we're creating a carbon project. So on the left is, again, a sort of baseline situation with the degraded pasture. And on the right is an example of a more mature agroforestry system. You can see here, this is a really well organised one, you can see the timber trees coming through there, and then these are citrus fruit trees in lines. In terms of the carbon bit, and in an abandoned agricultural area, there's not very much carbon. So if it's a pasture, in this kind of business as usual situation, pasture with all the trees gone, or the slash and burn agricultural system where they normally leave a few more trees, there's like 10 tons of carbon dioxide per hectare in a degraded pasture, or about 76 tons of carbon dioxide in this slash and burn fallow system, because obviously when they've done the slash and burn agriculture and they abandon it, then some fallow is left fallow, some trees grow back, and then some years later they come and deforest it again. So we've actually calculated through field work and measuring trees using a sampling approach how much carbon there is in sort of an average degraded pasture and an average slash and burn fallow system. So not very much, but if we plant our 1,000 trees, which is a combination of fruit trees and timber trees, and we factor in harvesting and loss and so on, then we'd have about, well, just under 500 tons of CO2 per hectare on average over a 30-year time period. So there's quite a lot of carbon difference, so we're able to sell carbon offsets based on that. I'm going to go back and just talk a little bit more about the carbon bit later on, for those who are interested in that. But another major part of our strategy is this commercialisation of the native Amazonian fruits. You can quickly guess the fruit, actually. So does anyone know what that is? These are all native fruits of Peruvian Amazon. Look a bit familiar at all to anyone? No? It's the custard apple family. So that's a guanabana. These bottom two are the same thing, slightly different varieties. The colour's not actually that great, I have to say, on this. Maybe that's throwing me off. No one know what the bottom two are? They were in the soup. Chili. Yeah, chili. And then that's cocona, which is another fruit which grows in the shrub. So a very important part of our strategy is trying to increase the market really for these Amazonian fruits. We're particularly excited about the opportunity with chili pepper because that's got quite an established market here in the UK already. It's actually really fascinating the more you learn about chili peppers. It turns out that they're only native to South America, even though they play a huge part in Southeast Asian and Indian cuisine. And so where we're working, there's some really interesting native varieties. So the varieties we have here in the UK are hybrids, and chili peppers very easily interbreed between varieties, if not kept separate from each other. But we're working, there's these quite interesting wild varieties with very spicy flavour, so we see that as quite an interesting market opportunity as the global demand for chili peppers is really rising. So we're really hoping that we can tap into that, and we just won a grant recently for our smallholders to help, well, the funds basically will help them develop a trade association so they're able to actually sell these through contract. Also to develop a business strategy for selling the chili peppers, and to have a small storage and processing unit. Because one of the key things is at the moment they sell everything raw, and if you can do some processing like drying them and making them into powder, or pulping them, you can radically increase the value. And at the moment, all that value goes to intermediaries, so obviously if the farmers themselves can do that, then they will gain more from their neighbours, and hopefully they can improve their livelihoods. And similarly, these other fruits, which are coming from the orchard, from the trees, we're looking to improve the market for those in the future. Peru is an interesting country to be working in, actually, because Lima, although geographically quite far from Iquitos, is part of the same country. There's a real growing middle class in Lima who are quite interested increasingly in health, foods and so on. So we're hoping that in the future we can actually try and sell into the domestic market in Lima, either as processed or raw produce, which the farmers are completely unable to do right now because they only sell into the local market, as we said. But with some helping them jump some bureaucratic hurdles, set up as a trade association, then they'll be able to have contracts to potentially sell to restaurants or juice bars or whatever in Lima. Okay, so just a quick summary of what we do, because I'm trying to cover a million things, so I wanted to make sure we got the basics. So we're actually helping them planting the trees and maintaining them. So when we work with a smallholder family, we actually give them financial support. We actually pay them money for certain targets. So we'd give them a certain amount of money to help them prepare their land for planting, for like digging all the holes and lining up where you're going to plant, because we plant all the trees in lines. We also give them money for their weeding every 3 months, because they need that. Otherwise it's just too much to be doing this without getting an immediate return. We're developing technical specification for managing the agroforestry systems. Unlike if you were doing, planting pine trees in Scotland, there's no manual for planting these native trees in Peru. So in terms of pest control and exactly how much fertilizer you should put down, etc. So we are, with time, developing improved technical specification on how best to prepare these trees in the nursery and how to cultivate them so they grow faster and so on. We're managing this carbon certification element, so actually getting carbon offset certified for the reforestation. I'm going to talk about that in a second. That's kind of one of my areas of expertise myself, apart from working on plant features. So I've been working on that element myself particularly. We're doing a lot of training and capacity building with the farmers, both in workshops, bringing them together, but also we have a permanent technician who's an agronomist who goes to the farm and visits them, either on an individual basis or goes to see a few of them and does a lesson on pruning and goes to see them in their farms. And it's really, really important to do that for these kind of projects to be successful, for the farmer to be continually motivated and encouraged in these early years so that he sees success. And then we hope in the long term the model will be, we don't have to have our agronomists doing that, but neighbours will see that the project is successful and want to get involved in the programme. So you can also have farmers training other farmers and so on. We're working on these business strategies to help sell the fruits, and long term we see that there's such a huge area of Peru that needs to be reforested. There's so many farmers that need essentially some kind of technical extension assistance to implement sustainable agroforestry or sustainable agriculture. It's not really possible to do that always through charity and philanthropic donations. So long term we hope to be able to have this become more of a business model where you could bring private investment and link them with smallholder farmers to enable a much bigger scaling up of our this model if it's proven successful with the pilots that we do over the next coming 5 years. Shall I just say a couple of words on the carbon certification before I wrap up? So I don't know how many of you are sort of familiar with the world of carbon certification, but as probably most of you know, under the Kyoto Protocol, countries that were signatories, developed countries that were signatories, took on commitments to reduce their carbon emissions and caps. But there's also been a real growth in voluntary carbon markets, and if you fly to Spain, you could offset the emission that it takes the plane to get there on a personal level, so you can carbon neutralise your activities. So there's been a real growth in the need for standards to regulate these carbon credits that are being sold. So with that in mind, we've got our project, we're getting our project certified with one of the leading standards, which is the Verified Carbon Standard. So we've been going through a very rigorous audit showing exactly all the trees that we're planting and all the community consultation we've done and biodiversity assessment and so on, to prove that what we're doing is actually reducing carbon emissions and we can issue carbon credits. So we've been doing that under the Verified Carbon Standard and also under the Climate, Community and Biodiversity Aligned Standard. And ultimately our project will be generating X tons of carbon credits, which we can sell, and they'll have a monetary value probably somewhere between $5 and $10 per ton of carbon dioxide. So that's how that works. I think I'm not going to go on and explain details of that now because I'm looking at the time, but the model that we've developed for doing this carbon certification is quite innovative. It's called a group project. That's really helped us to be doing something more leading in this carbon certification world. Can we develop something that can kind of be scaled up over time? Because we did that, we managed to win quite a decent grant from the Finnish government, which helped fund some of our other operations. So I guess the take-home point is the stuff we're doing on the carbon certification is fairly leading and interesting. If anyone's particularly interested in that, I'm happy to take questions or to correspond with you on that afterwards, but I think it might bore everyone if we go into all the details of that now. So just a few words to wrap up. How can you support us, or why am I here at Durham? I was interested to come back to Durham, obviously, because I was at Durham. I'd be really keen to have more links between Plant Your Future and Durham University. In the past, we've had a number of people do master's research with Plant Your Future from other universities in the UK and the US. We've also had people volunteer after they finished undergraduate, so would be really delighted to have some connection with Durham doing that moving forward. Also, would be very happy if anyone at Durham or student body at Hatfield was interested in helping fundraise and doing kind of awareness building, I guess, on climate change and the role of forestry. We've planted about 20,000 trees already, between 20 and 25,000 at the moment, because we're actively planting right now. So we need to raise money constantly to help maintain those, because as I said, we don't just plant them and then leave the farmer. We also want to expand our model further. Just for your interest, to give you an idea of the kinds of costs involved, it's very expensive reforesting. It's much more expensive reforesting than, say, building a school, actually. So with £50, you can provide a farmer seed, fertiliser and nursery equipment to plant 100 chili pepper plants. And then going up to, say, £3,000, that would allow us to include a new family in the programme and plant 1,000 trees, and for them to receive technical help for that for a whole year. So it is quite expensive. Hopefully, as we scale up more, costs will be reduced, because obviously we could have a technician working with more farmers, and also we're very keen to train up farmers who are more leaders within the community, for them to take more of a role within their community to spread the word and do supervision of activities. So in summary, I really believe Amazon rainforest is really important globally for climate change, mitigation purposes, and for biodiversity that's there at the global level, and also for all the local people there. I think it's really important we protect standing forest. I think it's an absolute tragedy that slash and burn carries on in the way it does, and most of the farmers who are doing it don't really want to be doing it. So I really believe in trying to support these kinds of programs which work with smallholders to try and reduce deforestation and help them achieve more sustainable livelihoods. Yeah, I'm happy to take any questions. Yes?
Did you ever encounter any hostility from the local farmers when you came over there with your plants, or were they generally receptive?
Yeah, generally. generally, like one of the reasons I set up the charity was because they really wanted help changing and being able to do reforestation, and they're really interested in being able to link into global markets, national markets. So generally, really positive. Obviously, you meet people there that are really self-interested, and there's been lots of failed projects in the past, and sometimes we've worked with people, we've hired people to work with us who've got their own gains in mind, and that can create problems. So like someone will want more pay from us, for example, and then they say bad things in the community. But we're generally overcoming that by the fact that we're quite consistent, we continue to work there. So we've had like a few bad encounters with people who just wanted to get money from us because they see that we're foreigners. But overall, very strong community support. Like we've got a long list of farmers that now want to join the scheme. Yeah.
So to build on Ross' question, I think it's so interesting and important what you're doing. And I was wondering to what extent you're facing challenges being a British organisation coming to Peru, whether that also creates hostility, not just to the farmers, but also from authorities.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So we're a registered charity in England. We're actually registered in Peru as well as a civil association. We, for lots of reasons, we have quite close links there. Like we've had the same coordinator for the last 4.5 years. So pretty much since the beginning of our activities. So I think the fact that he's local and he's the day-to-day man really helps us. And I mean, I'm not going there so often now. I lived there originally, and I'm now much more UK-based and go on visit. So I'm not sure that we're fully perceived really as being that foreign, because our main person is Peruvian. When we had this grant, like for 2 years from the Finnish government, at that point we associated with a Peruvian local NGO. So that also made us seem more Peruvian. But a major issue in this area is like high levels of corruption in regional government and with local NGOs. So we're actually no longer working with the NGO, although that NGO we work with is very well regarded at the national level in Peru. They took a huge overhead from the grant. They took like 30% or something of the grant, which is really high in this situation where overheads are not very high. So actually, it's loads of frustration from smallholder farmers in the villages that money that comes in from overseas doesn't get to them, and that's often a problem with middle class people in Peru taking the money. That is a major issue in corruption. So in a way, they quite like us because they know that we're quite honest and they actually see money coming through. So it's more, I think it's less the sort of foreign national kind of thing. It's more ultimately building up trust, and because we have some really good Peruvians involved, that's just building up confidence over time. I think they quite like being associated with the British NGO. Like, I guess the Americans are maybe, there's more of a sort of negative connotation to Americans, but in fact we're British, not that many British people doing stuff in the Peruvian Amazon. Like that plays out quite well. Don't find much hostility really. Yeah.
I wondered how straightforward the carbon offsetting process has been, because there's often, certainly at this end, a certain amount of uncertainty about the process. And Higher Education Funding Council doesn't allow us to offset, for example. So I just wondered how you see it from the point of view of somebody who's immersed in it. I mean, what would you be saying to Hatfield about carbon offsetting?
Yeah. Well, so I guess there's this more overarching debate on carbon offsets, I guess, about whether you should be offsetting, whether it's the right thing to allow the UK to buy forest credits from Peru rather than reducing emissions domestically. I think that's the issue that higher education people have with that. But from like the perspective of someone who's really interested in development and conservation of the Amazon, I think this is an amazing opportunity because it's low-hanging fruit in terms of the cost of reducing emissions per tonne. So actually it's very efficient to do offsetting this way and have all these co-benefits like reducing poverty and protecting biodiversity. So I think my personal opinion is it's good to have a balance between trying to reduce emissions domestically and also supporting these kind of climate change offsets, carbon offsets, which have all these co-benefits. Like I just think it's much more interesting if governments and companies buy credits from forestry projects to have these co-benefits rather than say just from a wind farm in Brazil. I think these kind of projects bring all these other benefits. It's quite nice then you can actually really support positive development work whilst carbon offsetting. the process of getting certified is long and complex. Hopefully it will be worth all the work that we've done because we've created this model which can be scaled up over time. So as more smallholders come into the programme, they don't have to go through all the technical work we've already done. It will just be a case of if they can meet these criteria, which mainly relate to them having deforested land, being smallholders, then they can enter into our framework and be able to tap into carbon offsetting. So it is loads of work, it's quite expensive to get audited, so it's only worth it if you ultimately scale up. But we've kind of taken a long-term view on that, hoping that this will just it's so useful to have this extra revenue stream from the carbon to help give the project sustainability over the long term and help with maintenance. So, yeah, that's my take on that.
Where do the trees come from? And have you thought about like growing them yourselves or having the local people grow them?
They are. They like collecting seeds locally.
So they
and they're
grow
growing
all
them
the
in their
trees and the
nurseries.
fruit trees from scratch as well?
Initially, we grew the fruit trees ourselves in village nurseries, and we bought the timber trees because it's a bit more complicated to grow timber trees in a nursery. There was huge opposition from our partner NGO that we'd even do these community nurseries, but we really pushed for that, and we thought that was important and totally doable. And we had a lot of success with the fruit nurseries, and now we're growing all of them in community nurseries. So the villagers have got their own nurseries, and then what we've got is when you have mortality actually on the farmer himself has a small nursery for the replanting, which is needed when you have mortality after 6 months or a year. So no, and the seeds are all sourced locally, so we either buy them from people who've, say, collected them upriver, or we actually have the farmers go out and get them from a tree which they know has got a good seed. But it's not the same there with seeds. You can't buy like packs of dry seeds. You only get seeds like in the season of when that particular tree is producing. So you have to plan all your planting nurseries around that. So seed supply is quite a complex issue, but no, all our seeds are local, and we're moving towards having full growing happening at the nurseries in villages or on farms.
How did you choose the villages originally that you started with, and how did you approach them and convince them to go ahead with your program and to join and get involved?
Yeah, that's a good question, because it's really hard at the beginning when you haven't got any track record. Well, I went to that area originally because when I did my masters, I was linked to a research institute in Iquitos, and I was just generally working in that zone. So I just got to know some villages. I went to lots of villages when I was doing my master's work to ask questions, and then the villages we chose initially are the most accessible, and we initially worked with the president of a local farmers cooperative, which is kind of overarching for the area, and he had some contacts there. So that's what we did initially. But things are now changed dramatically because we know all these farmers that are in our schemes, and they know people in other villages, and so now that we're kind of established, it's quite easy to go to other villages because we're kind of connected in now through local contacts. But yeah, we kind of mainly chose our 4 villages at some level them being relatively accessible and close to each other, because it logistically wasn't very easy to have them all far away.
So how do you see, or what can we do here in Durham to link up with the program, and do you have any suggestions in that way, how we get more involved from here?
Well, it really depends where your interests are, I guess. I'm really open to people doing research with the project, so doing some kind of, there's multiple different, things that need further research. One thing, just an example of something we're doing right now, just as an idea of the kinds of things. We have someone at the University of Edinburgh with some PhD students working on developing a digital monitoring program for the project. So they're using smartphones and developing a sort of database of parameters that can be monitored using the smartphone in the field and taking a GPS and a photo at the same time. So we have some students there working with us to help develop that. So that's just one thing. So there's all kinds of other things that need to happen from a research, a practical research perspective, or more applied thing like they're doing. So there's potential to do work like that. Obviously we really need funds, so I'm really interested, obviously, if there's any opportunity to do fundraising. As Tim said, the university cannot buy carbon offsets off the project. But like if the student body just completely independently in Hatfield, for example, wanted to go carbon neutral through tree planting, you could do that, but it wouldn't be recognised at university level. Could we do that? We're looking
Yeah,
for.
the JCR could do that.
The JCR could do that. If you wanted to, you could work out, like you could do an awareness raising exercise. You could work out like how much carbon is emitted from electricity and transport to get here and food or something like that you cannot reduce. Obviously, I really think I encourage you to reduce as much as you can, but there is like a certain amount that can't be reduced. You could work that out, and we could plant trees to compensate for that, and we could have some kind of ongoing program where people go and see that in the summer and volunteer and just have an ongoing link, something like that. I would love to, because I was here at Hatfield, I would love to have some kind of link with Hatfield like that happening, and a few students going out every summer.
Well, that's perhaps a good note to finish on. I happen to know that the Duck Jazz and Cocktails on Thursday evening are donating all their funds to your charity.
Oh, amazing.
So that will be some modest input. Well, it depends how much we all drink, really, but the more cocktails we buy, the more Plant Your Future will benefit. Well, I wonder what the current students think about where they might be in 13 years' time. Will any of you be coming back to Durham to talk about your charity and your work in some relatively remote part of the world and so on and so forth? But it's been a fascinating talk, Jenny, thank you very much. I'm sure for most of us we have some rather vague and general view of Amazonia, but it's nice to see some detail and get some real input from what's going on. And of course we applaud your efforts and admire it hugely. And and maybe there's a challenge here for Hatfield and other colleges to think, well, can we do something about our own emissions, and never mind what Hefke says about the university and so on, but for people just to take as it were, a sort of more personal, localised view and get on and do something about it. So we're enormously grateful that you've come back to Durham, come back to Hatfield, and shown us some really important work and so on tonight. And obviously we wish you all success in the future. But
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming, and thanks for everyone who organised it and